All right. So today this week we're gonna talk about early childhood. These are also known as the preschool years. This is a really fun, I think, time of kids' lives. They're starting to get some ability to use symbols, starting to understand some logical problems, but they're still having a lot of trouble. And so the normal kind of mistakes that kids make cognitively at this age are really part of the most interesting and fun part of early childhood. So let's jump right in. Okay, so early childhood, we're talking about um, 2 years old to 6 years old, and one of the common things about cognitive development at this age is that there's a mixture of sound logic, things that make sense that would be like the thinking of an older child, and magical or non-direct logical thinking. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Um, People have talked about this as a patchwork of insight and ignorance, um, and competence and incompetence. So there are some areas that the kids will know very well. They may not be able to kind of transfer that knowledge or to apply that knowledge to new problems, which is part of the issue perhaps with the mixture of insight and ignorance. But also, their knowledge is going to be very situated in particulars. So, um, having some of the common hangups of no, this dog or my sister is Shasta. She's my sister, but she cannot be somebody else's mom because she's sister, right? So attaching labels and such in a very binary right wrong, and also pretty static kind of way. So not very dynamic, not very flexible in their thinking. Okay, so some other things that go along with this preschool age and that are actually in most cultures changing across this age group is that we have different expectations for kids. Um, from toddlers, kiddos younger than two, to kids older than six, there's a really big jump in terms of, in these 4 years, in terms of what we expect from kids. One study looked at differences across whether children in different cultural communities could be seen as choosing to or responsible for hitting somebody else in the head. Can a kid break something on purpose? And are kids mean? And there's different changes or different kind of ages at which this changes across different cultural communities. In the US, we tend to be pretty egalitarian across age groups, that even kids younger than two would be told not to do something, would be corrected if they were hitting somebody else on the head. Um, they would We would attribute intention to kids. They meant to break that. And we also might consider a kid as trying to be mean or doing something to be mean. Um, Younger than two through six, right? In other cultural communities, um, people would not necessarily assume that kids knew better before a certain age, right? So, oh, you can't tell him don't hit another kid on the head because they don't get it. They don't understand that that other person has thoughts and feelings of their own. They can't break something on purpose because they weren't really intending to do it, right? They hadn't really thought through their actions in the way that an older kid might. So these kinds of expectations and the rules for behavior or how you punish or handle behavior change dramatically across a lot of different cultures in these ages, so across early childhood. So another way of thinking about this is to say that in preschool, in these ages, one of the main things that kids are doing are learning and starting to be held accountable for knowing the rules and expectations for social interaction in their environments. So we're going to first start with talking about more of the cognitive development, and then we'll look at a little bit of social aspects, um, kind of implications of that later. That'll probably be in a second uh, video. So Piaget had this preoperational stage as 2 to 6 years. He again, this is kids have developed representational thought. They can have one thing stand for another. They can use symbols. This changes their pretend play dramatically because they can involve symbols. Again, at the beginning of this use of representations, this use of symbols is not going to be as complex, or it's not going to last as long. It's not going to be as persistent um, with interruptions or distractions or whatever, as it will be later in life. So later in that preschool years. But they're starting now, right? They're starting to use symbols in new ways. Despite that big jump in the use of symbols in this age group, one of the main things that Piaget talked about here was the limitations of this stage. The main characteristic being centration. And this is the focus on one most salient aspect of a situation, of an utterance of a problem, and ignoring other aspects of a situation or a problem that might be important. We can see this in how kids may confuse their own point of view with other people's point of view. Well, I think that Rocky Road is the best kind of ice cream there is, so obviously everyone else also knows that Rocky Road is the best kind of ice cream there is, right? And that's just silly, but there's more. We'll go through some other examples of that as well. Trouble considering multiple aspects of a problem. We see this with Piaget's conservation tasks, we'll talk about in a second. One of the ways of explaining the trouble that kids have with conservation tasks is talking about the difference between appearance and reality. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then some problems with cause and effect and how kids are thinking about cause and effects. Okay, so centration basically is ultimately the same thing we try to do when we're getting somebody, when we're telling a riddle, right? The goal of a riddle, if you're doing it well, right? And I may not do that well in this reading, so bear with me. But if you're doing it right, what you're wanting to do is to get somebody so stuck on one aspect of the problem, but that they forget or don't consider something else that's really important, right? The reason a riddle is a problem is because you are likely to get hung up on something that's slightly off or not as key to the main question or issue, right? So here's an example that I have really bad abilities with graphics on the computer. So we have a mommy bowl and a daddy bowl on two sides of a pin, and that little guy in the middle is the baby bowl. So if we are imagining that mommy bowl on top there and daddy bowl on bottom there are equidistant from baby bowl, the question here is, will the baby bowl go to the mommy bowl, or will the baby bowl go to the daddy bowl? Remember, they're equidistant. Baby can go whichever way. They're not up and down, so there's no gravity or any of that having to do anything. So which way does the baby bowl go? I'll give you a second to think of your answer. So the answer for this particular riddle is that the baby bull is going to go to the daddy bull because mommy bulls do not exist. A mommy would be a cow and not a bull, right? So if the riddle is set up well, you are not considering the terms of the problem. You are considering the problem. Where does the baby go, right? As opposed to, are both of those options realistic options? Right. So this is an example in a riddle. We can get adults to think about how preschoolers tend to think, or some of the problems they tend to have with everyday life. Again, centration is young children's difficulty with thinking about more than one aspect of a situation at a time. And we can see this in their inability to consider other people's thoughts and feelings, theory of mind, Piaget's conservation tasks, which we'll go into a little bit here too, but also appearance reality. So the difference between what something looks like and what something is. So one of the ways that we see the centration is egocentrism. Um, egocentris- uh, Egocentrism is a word that has a lot of baggage to it. It's a negative thing that we talk about when we talk about it with adults. Um, with adults, thinking about only your perspective and ignoring other people's perspective is either a conscious choice, a not very great choice, but a conscious choice, um, or for adults, it can also be cognitive or emotional overload. I've got so much on my plate right now. I'm just feeling through and working through so much. I can't even begin to understand somebody else's perspective, right? For early childhood kids, for these preschool age kids, um, egocentrism seems to be a cognitive challenge that, even given time and even given all of their cognitive resources to work with, they still have trouble with this, right? We see this in a couple ways that we're going to look at in examples, and one is spatial or point of view tasks, but also egocentric speech or communication tasks. So the point of view tasks, the common study to examine this, and this is a study paradigm that's been used several times for different by different researchers, and this is what we call the three mountain tasks. Three mountain task. So if you imagine a table, it's got three mountains on it. They're all different heights. Depending on which way you're looking at it, you can see different things. If you're looking at it with the tallest mountain, biggest mountain in front of you, you might not see the smaller mountain. You might not see the house that's behind there on the smaller mountain. You might miss some of the other perspectives, right? So they ask a kid to walk around the whole table, right? Look at the three mountains very carefully from each side of the table. And then they put a teddy bear on the other side of the table, or a human, or somebody else on the other side of the table, right, from the kid. And they ask the kid to describe what the teddy bear or the other human is seeing from that perspective. Again, the kid has walked around the table, has seen the thing from that perspective, and is asked to, while sitting in front of the table on the opposite side, tell us what the teddy bear sees, right? And so the issue here for kids in preschool is that they tend to describe what they are seeing rather than the perspective that they remember, that would be from the point of view of the teddy bear or whoever else we put on the other side of the table. And so this is, some people have argued, is part of dealing with executive functioning, and it is inhibiting your own response. I am seeing the big mountain on my right. I am seeing it on this side, but I know, because I walked around, I can remember, if I close my eyes, I can remember that I walked around and the teddy bear is seeing it from the left side, right? So you have to inhibit your own um, uh, senses, right? And what they are telling you, to be able to remember and call to mind the representation of what somebody else saw. Again, according to Piaget and lots of other studies, kids are able to do mental representations, right? But the act of calling that mental representation up and putting your own, what you are seeing with your eyes right this moment, on hold and imagining that other mental representation is a lot. So this is a challenge for a lot of preschool kids. We also see this in terms of egocentric speech, in that kids will, especially in early preschool, will often engage in collective monologues. So I'm talking as if we're talking to each other, but I'm not leaving you space to interject. And I'm basically just describing what I'm doing in a common space as we are working in this area together, right? So if I am building with blocks with another kid, and I'm a preschool age kid doing a collective monologue, I might say, okay, so I'm going to put this block here and this block here, and we're building towers. And so we're going to put this here, and that's your tower, and this is my tower. And I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to put that, and then we can connect them. And then I'm going to put, right? So I'm not engaging you in questions. We're not working out how we're going to build things together. I'm just monologuing about what I'm doing. It is about what we're both doing, right? But it's not about, it is not a true conversation. No dialectic there. So another example is a study where you have a screen set up between two kids, and you ask a kid on one side to show the kid on the other side how to build a tower, right? And so the speaker is likely to assume that the person on the other side of the screen who cannot see them is thinking about the objects in the same way as they are. So they would give not enough information for the person who is following to copy what they did. So the speaker might say, okay, so you take this block and you stack it, right? In this context with all these different colors and shapes of blocks, that is not enough information, right? On the other hand, the kid who's listening is likely to hear that instruction and not ask any questions and just put whatever block they're holding or looking at on the stack. So also not either assuming that the other person's looking at the same thing, but not even engaging it at that depth. Just, okay, cool, take this one. This must be this one, right? All right. So another one, which is fascinating, and this is, again, one of those things that we start to get in preschool, we start to work with, and we get better as we go through childhood with this, is theory of mind. So the ability to think about other people's mental states and form theories about what they understand, what they know. So we can infer, oh, that person must standing by a bunch of blocks that are all over the floor and they're crying. So maybe they are crying because their tower fell down, right? We would, under theory of mind, is to assume and be able to accurately kind of guess at how other people's actions are guided by beliefs and desires, and to understand what other people know and don't know. A classic task here is has been called the Smarties task. We've done this with a ton of other things besides Smarties, and I will upload a video about this, where kids have mistaken contents of either a candy box or a box of crayons, etc. Right? So the box is closed, and I say, "What do you think is in the box?" And the kid says, "Candies." And you open the box, and it's a bunch of ribbons. And you say, "Okay, so you saw what was in this box. What did you think was in the box before I opened it?" And they'll say, "Oh, ribbons," right? "I have always known that that was ribbons in there." "Okay, well, your mom didn't see what was in the box. She was in the other room. So when she sees this box of candies, or this candy box, what do you think she's going to think is in there?" And the kids will say, "Ribbons," right? So not only have I always had this information that I now have, but also anyone else would as well, right? So this is a problem with imagining both their own past mind or knowledge state, but also that of other people. This also connects to a moral reasoning in where kids are not inferring intentions, right? So part of theory of mind is understanding what other people knew, understanding what other people wanted or believed, right? So in this preschool age group, and also through the beginning of elementary age, elementary school, so middle childhood, kids are often very black and white with their moral judgments, right? There are rules, and if you break the rules, that is wrong. You get in trouble for bad things, so if you got in trouble, that is wrong. And so what you intended to do or what you wanted to do don't matter. So if I stole a bread to feed somebody, stealing is wrong, so it was wrong. It doesn't matter how noble my intentions. Okay, so conservation, and I'm sure you guys have heard about conservation in other classes. Again, this is the idea that kids are struggling with the way something looks and the way something is, right? So one of the classic examples is conservation of liquid. I'll see if I can find a clip and I'll post that up. Another one here is conservation of number. So moving one line of these pennies apart, and kids will often say that the longer one has more. So one of the reasons kids may make this mistake is what appearance reality, right? So that it looks different. It looks different, so something must have changed. Centration is again the idea Piaget had behind why kids have trouble with thinking, or the label that Piaget gave to kids having trouble with thinking about more than one aspect at this time. A lot of other people, again, have attached this to executive function. And another way of talking about this in the literature is to say that kids are perception bound, right? So they have trouble breaking their attention and their focus in problem solving off of the way something looks to consider, is it whether the essence of the thing has changed because it looks different. Also, another example of appearance reality is to give kids a picture like this and say what happened to the straw in this picture. We see a change in kids' ability to understand whether the object has changed because it looks different or not. And again, kids do better with this as they move through preschool age, but they also are going to do better at this with things that they're more familiar with. Pre-causal reasoning, this is another example of centration, is that kids tend to think transductively. So this is from one particular situation to another particular situation, as opposed to using deduction or induction, right? So this is generally the way things work. So let me talk about this particular case that falls into that category. That would be deduction. Or induction is to say, okay, so there's lots of cases where this seems to look like this is how these two factors relate. So maybe I can come up with a general rule that argues that all of these things are the same, right? So an example of the transductive thinking, right? So from particular to particular would be, I take my nap in the afternoon, even though the sun is down and we're eating dinner, I haven't had my nap, so it hasn't been afternoon yet, right? Another one that is, I think, is funnier because this seems to creep into adults thinking as well, is that since graveyards are places where dead people are, graveyards are dangerous and the cause of death. Okay, so another aspect of pre-operational or pre-operations before I leave this little video is the idea or the question of whether or not this is actually a stage, right? So 2 to 6-year-olds tend to do less well on Piaget's classic tests of pre-operations, right? The conservation tests, theory of mind tasks. They do better 5 or 6, right? Definitely after 7, they do better. On the other hand, kids are better at simpler tasks that are related to stuff that they have regular experience every day in, right? So if they are used to using straws, they're more likely to do better with that straw question in the appearance reality example. They also do better with training. So since this is a gradual change across 2 to 6, some people have argued that this is not a stage, right? A stage, lots of things are happening together. And however, we might call the next stage of middle childhood, concrete operations, a stage, because then we do start to see a bunch of things changing as kids are moving out of this pre-operational form of thinking. Okay, and we'll come back to thinking about the social and emotional ways that some of this cognitive development is related to.